Now another one that I like is about a fellow named Sid Richardson. And by Christmas time, I'll have a book about Sid Richardson. It's in the mail now. Sid Richardson was a gambler and an oil man in Fort Worth, and of course he frequented Top of the Hill. And he had a run of bad luck and was flat broke. And Fred Browning knew about it, and he asked him to come out and visit with him, and he said, I've got a problem you can help me with, and in turn, I'll furnish you with room and board and pick up your tab. And in fact, the men got involved in a few oil deals together. But anyway, this is what happened. The Texas oil men, the new rich who had just made a bundle of money, would come to the casino. And of course, any oil man worth his salt, when he gets to that crap table, it's his mission to break the bank. And Fred Browning knew this. And the oil man would lose all his cash money, and then he would reach into his pocket and he would come out with some oil properties and lay them on the table and want to shoot for that. Well, Fred Browning had no idea what those oil properties were worth. So he asked Sid, he said, Sid, if you'll come out here and be here, especially on the weekends, when these oil tycoons make that play and they bring out that oil property, we'll run it back to you. We'll have an office for you. You can take a look at it and let me know what line of credit to give these guys. So Sid Richardson would frequent the casinos here and was a help. And I checked the Texas oil journals, and actually he and Fred Browning drilled some wells together. Now, another story that I love to tell, and this will come out in Sid's book. He was raised down here in Athens, Texas. And when he got out of high school, he went to college at Baylor. His junior year, his father died, and he got a telegram, come home, and the family was destitute. They were out of money, so Sid had to go to work, which he was going to go to work anyway. But he got a job hauling pipe as a teamster from Fort Worth to Wichita Falls. Well, every weekend that he had off, he loved to come back to the Westbrook Hotel there in Wichita Falls, because on the mezzanine floor there, all the oil men would be congregating, and they'd be waving their oil properties and shouting how many acres and how much an acre and the nearest production and so forth. It's just like the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. One man actually had signs hung over him that had a list of all the properties. Other men had it stuck in their hat bands. But it was quite a show. And of course, Sid wanted to get in on this, but he didn't have any money. It was about the second or third weekend that he attended, he saw his friend there, a one-eyed fellow with a patch over his eye named Otis Denton. Otis had a cluster of men around him, and after his business with them was finished, he saw Sid, and he motioned for Sid to come over. When Sid got there, Otis told him, he said, now Sid, he reached into his pocket, he took out a packet of papers. He said, these are Texas standard oil lease papers. And he said, all you have to do is get the farmer's name up at the top, the legal description and how many acres of his property, and then the terms and conditions of the lease. The farmer signs it and you sign it as witness. Then bring that paper back here to the Westbrook Hotel, because you can sell it for many times more than what you paid that farmer. And Otis told him, he said, now Sid, you tell that farmer anything to get him to sign that lease. Well, Sid was delighted with this. He took the papers home with him, and he got his dictionary out. He studied the vocabulary. He got everything in order. And the next Sunday, he bounced out across the prairie, his Model T Ford, and he called on 5 farmers. All 5 farmers had already leased their properties. Now, we're in a hot area up around Electra, Texas. But the 6th farmer he called on had not leased his property. And the reason he had not leased his property was because he had put a condition in there that a well had to be drilled within 30 days. Now, Sid knew it took $50,000 to drill a well to get down to the depth where the oil was. And he didn't have $50,000. He didn't even know anybody that had $50,000. So it hit a stone wall, and he was kind of stunned, and he was thinking there. And then he remembered what Otis Denton told him. Tell that farmer anything to get him to sign the lease. So he agreed to drill the well within 30 days and bought a 100-acre lease for $1 an acre. Gave the farmer a check for $100. Now he's bouncing back across the prairie in his Model T Ford. Incidentally, those oil people drove right through fences. They didn't pay any attention to the roads. They drove right straight to the farmer's house. He gets back to the hotel, and he's been thinking all the way back, and he's feeling really low. He said, I felt like a dog that had chased a car and caught it, and I didn't know what to do with it. He said, I didn't know anybody with $50,000, and he said, what made it even worse, I gave the farmer a check for $100, and I only have $51 in the bank. He said, I was sitting there, and all this trading was going on around me, and I was sitting there at the table, and the waiter came up and asked me what I wanted for lunch. I said, just bring coffee. He said, I was feeling so low, and I was thinking about the Athens newspaper down there in Athens, Texas. They never have much to write about. And now I'm faced with court action and probably some jail time for the hot check, and the Athens paper will love that. That'll be a headline, and it'll embarrass my good Baptist family. Well, about that time, a great big broad-shouldered fella comes up. He's got on a white Stetson hat and a leather jacket, and he leans in on the table and he says, does anybody here know Sid Richardson? Sid thought, my God, it's a Texas Ranger. They've already found out that I'm overdrawn at the bank. He said, well, I may as well take my medicine. So he stood up, stuck his hand out, and said, I'm Sid Richardson, sir. The other fellow said, my name is Dick Griffin, son, and I represent the Hog Creek Oil Company. He said, about 15 minutes after you left that farmer's house, I called on him, and he told me that he had signed a lease with you. Now, Mr. Richardson, I am prepared to pay you cash for that lease. Sid is stunned. But that East Texas mind is clicking. He stands up, and he says, Mr. Griffin, he said, I tell you what you do. You tell me what you think is a fair price. Dick Griffin scratched his head, and he said, son, I'll pay you $40,000 cash for that lease right now. Sid is shocked. But that East Texas mind is still clicking. He says, Mr. Griffin, he said, I tell you what I'll do. You make that $50,000, guaranteed to drill a well within 30 days, and pay me an eighth override, and you got a deal. Sid Richardson stuck out his hand. Dick Griffin took it and shook it, and that we know now that Sid Richardson had his foot on the first rung of that ladder that carried him to such great success, because at one time in his career he had more money than H.L. Hunt. And there's so many great stories about him. You come back. So the champ goes out there and he gets on his bicycle and he's staying away from Lou Jenkins, but he gets knocked down 3 times. He comes back to his corner. The ring doctor comes in, takes a look at his face, which looks like hammered hamburger with blood coming out of it, stops the fight. The fight's over, and Lou Jenkins, 2 months before his 24th birthday, is the world's lightweight champion. Now, he immediately challenges the next weight up, the welterweight, and defeats him. Yeah. This is a great Texas story, never been published anywhere else except in your Top of the Hill book, because Fred Browning adopted him, more or less, and made over $1 million, always betting on his boy and taking the odds. Great Texas story. And incidentally, I got a phone call from California, and his son, Lou Jenkins' son, bought one of these books. Now, I'm going to close on that because there's other speakers that are going to take your time, but I want to thank you so much for having me. We've got the books over here in the corner. They're $20 each if you'd like to have one. Thank you. Wow!